This happened about 5 years ago. Life was hitting me and my girlfriend, Stacy, pretty hard. You know how it is, the endless cycle of work, bills, and the suffocating gray of the city. We were reaching a breaking point. Stacy was the one who suggested it, a cabin trip. Just a few days in the woods to breathe, disconnect, and remember what it felt like to be human again. I loved the idea, but my bank account didn't. To make it work, Stacy suggested we invite my best friend Randy and his girlfriend. They were a solid couple, or so we thought, and splitting the cost would make the trip actually happen. Randy was on board immediately. We spent weeks looking at listings, eventually settling on this beautiful, secluded place with a massive stone fireplace. We wanted that warm and cozy winter vibe. But then, life threw a wrench in the gears. Less than a week before the trip, Randy and his girlfriend broke up. It wasn't a "let's stay friends" kind of breakup, it was a nuclear explosion. Stacy and I felt terrible. We didn't have the funds to cover Randy's half, but it felt wrong to take his money for a trip he wasn't going on. I called him, prepared to offer a refund I couldn't afford, but Randy insisted. He told us to go, have a romantic getaway, and not worry about him. For a day, we were excited. A private trip? Just the two of us. Perfect. Then came the call that changed everything. "Hey man," Randy said, his voice sounding a bit forced. "I found someone else to go. A new girl. Her name's Lucy." My heart sank. Stacy was even more annoyed. Who brings a total stranger, a rebound, on a double-date cabin trip in the middle of nowhere? Travel compatibility is a real thing. You don't just test a new relationship in a locked wooden box in the forest. But Randy begged. He even offered to pay for my portion of the trip if we just let him bring her. He promised she was cool and that we'd love her. We agreed, mostly out of guilt and a lack of options. But that decision would haunt us for the rest of the year. The weekend arrived, and we all piled into my truck. Randy introduced us to Lucy. She was quiet. Mousy is the word that comes to mind. She sat in the back, barely speaking, barely looking up. We're loud people, we crack jokes, we play music, we talk. But every time we tried to engage Lucy, she'd give a one-word answer and retreat back into her shell. By the time we reached the cabin, I realized I hadn't even heard the full tone of her voice. The first night started off normal enough. We got the fire going, the atmosphere was cozy, and we decided to play Uno. It's a simple game, right? Harmless. Stacy was winning. She's competitive, but in a fun way. When she laid down her second-to-last card and yelled Uno, the vibe in the room shifted instantly. It was like someone flipped a light switch from cozy to predatory. Lucy looked at Stacy. Her mousy expression vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You're cheating," Lucy said. Her voice wasn't quiet anymore. It was sharp, cold, and trembling with anger. We laughed at first. I thought, okay, she's got a weird sense of humor. But she wasn't joking. She started screaming. Literally screaming at Stacy about a card game. She was accusing Stacy of hiding cards, of lying, of being a snake. It was the reaction of a toddler, but in the body of a woman who looked like she could snap. When Randy tried to calm her down, she threw her entire hand of cards across the room and stormed out. Randy looked at us, face red with embarrassment, and apologized. We tried to laugh it off, but the air in that cabin had turned sour. Later that night, Lucy reappeared for dinner like nothing had happened. No apology, just a blank stare. Then came the oversharing. She started talking about her and Randy's private time. Not just "we're happy" talk, I mean graphic, deeply personal details. That made the room go silent. Randy was visibly dying inside. I kept trying to crack jokes to steer the conversation away, but she just kept going, her eyes fixed on nothing. That night was the first time I felt unsafe. Stacy woke me up in the dead of night. "Listen," she whispered. From across the cabin, I could hear them. Randy and Lucy were arguing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was vicious. It sounded like Lucy was attacking him verbally, her voice hitting these high, frantic notes. We stayed in our room, doors locked, pretending we didn't hear. We just wanted to make it to morning. The next day was a blur of awkward silence. Randy looked like he hadn't slept a wink. Lucy was nowhere to be seen for most of the day. Then came the second night. The night that still gives me chills. I woke up to a shadow standing over me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Randy. He looked terrified, his eyes were wide, and he was shaking. "Can I stay in here tonight?" he whispered. "And please, lock the door." I sat up, heart pounding. "Randy, what's going on?" He told me he had woken up and felt someone watching him. He opened his eyes to see Lucy standing at the foot of the bed. Just standing there. In the dark. When he asked her what she was doing, she didn't move. She just said, "I'm watching you sleep. Just in case." He said they stared at each other for what felt like an hour before she finally turned and walked out. Randy, thinking she was just being weird, waited a few minutes and then went to check on her. He moved the blanket on her side of the bed and felt something cold that it was a knife. A large, serrated kitchen knife, tucked right where her torso would have been. Randy panicked. He started creeping through the dark cabin toward our room. As he passed the living room, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Lucy was humming. She was wandering around the dark room, skipping and dancing in silence, like some kind of broken doll. As he got near our door, a floorboard creaked. Lucy stopped humming. She didn't turn around fully, but she tilted her head and said, in a voice that didn't sound like her own, "I see you." He bolted into our room and locked it. We sat there, the three of us, huddled together in the dark. We could hear her. We could hear her pacing the hallway, the light thud-thud-thud of her bare feet. Then, the sound of the front door opening. Randy looked out the window. It was freezing outside, below zero. Lucy was walking into the forest wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. Randy went to his room to check for the knife. He came back screaming, it was gone. She had taken it with her into the woods. Stacy, being the person she is, wanted to go after her. "We can't let her freeze," she cried. But Randy was done. He was paralyzed with fear. He told us he'd never been this scared in his life. While we were arguing about what to do, we heard the front door open again. Then the stomping. Lucy was back. She walked down the hall, humming that same rhythmic tune, and went into her room. None of us slept. We stayed in our room until 6 a.m. When we finally walked into the kitchen, Lucy was there. She was washing dishes, smiling, and greeted us like it was a beautiful sunny morning. Stacy and I tried to convince ourselves it was just extreme sleepwalking. We wanted to believe that so badly. But Randy was convinced something darker was happening. While we were packing to leave, determined to cut the trip short, Randy texted me. "Come to the room. Don't tell Lucy." I went. He showed me Lucy's bag. He had moved it to pack his own stuff, and a large knife, the same one from the night before, had fallen out of the side pocket. She hadn't left it in the woods. She hadn't put it back in the kitchen. She was keeping it with her. The drive home was the longest 3 hours of my life. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lucy sat in the back, staring out the window. Occasionally humming that same song. When we dropped them off, Randy ghosted her immediately. He blocked her on everything. And the weirdest part? She never reached out. She never tried to call him, never showed up at his house. It was like she just evaporated. Later, Stacy tried to find her on social media. Nothing. No Lucy matched her description. She even checked inmate records and public databases. There was no record of this woman existing under that name. I still think about that weekend. Who was she? Why did she have that knife? If Randy hadn't woken up, what was she waiting for? I don't go to cabins anymore. And I definitely don't play Uno. Because every time I hear a floorboard creak in the middle of the night, I can still hear that mousy voice whispering. I see you. Over the last few years, I've intentionally drifted away from the rest of the world. I've always been an introvert, someone who finds more comfort in silence than in the company of others. At one point, My anxiety was so overwhelming that I'd go to extreme lengths just to find total isolation. This habit led me to spend my weekends renting secluded cabins deep in the wilderness, places where I didn't have to be a person for a few days. But one specific getaway changed everything. It turned my love for solitude into a source of pure, unadulterated dread. I had found a cabin about 3 hours away from any major city. It was tucked away behind a dense curtain of pine trees. The plan was simple: hike, read, and exist in the quiet. The first night was peaceful, but by Saturday morning, the quiet started to feel heavy. While I was out on a trail, I heard it, the distinct sound of branches snapping behind me. It wasn't the random movement of a deer or a squirrel. It was rhythmic. Deliberate. Every time I stopped to listen, the woods went dead silent. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but shadows and trees. The paranoia got so bad that I cut my hike short and bolted back to the cabin, locking the door behind me. That night, the atmosphere shifted. To calm my nerves, I had a few drinks while sitting by the fireplace. Around 11:30 p.m., a sharp, sudden sound echoed through the room. Knock. 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 I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was no reason for anyone to be at my door in the middle of a forest at midnight. I approached the heavy wooden door, which had 2 long, vertical glass panes. I looked out, but the darkness was like a wall. Then, the knocking started again, louder this time. I reached over and flicked on the porch light. Standing there was a man. But he didn't look like a hiker, and he didn't look like a local. He was wearing a perfectly tailored, slate gray suit. His hair was slicked back with military precision, and he was. I backed away, stumbling into the kitchen as I stayed on the line with the dispatcher. By the time I gathered enough courage to look back at the door, he was gone. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the perimeter with flashlights but found no sign of the man in the gray suit. However, the officer called me over to my car. Every single one of my tires had been slashed. The cuts were clean and deep. He hadn't just been lost, he had been making sure I couldn't leave. The police escorted me to a hotel in the nearest town. I never went back to that cabin. I even left some of my belongings there because I couldn't bear the thought of stepping back inside that room. People have told me it was probably a prank or a local crazy person, but I know what I saw. I still have nightmares about those eyes pressed against the glass. And I still wonder, how did he know my name? And who, or what, was he really hiding from in those woods? About a year ago, my father passed away. We didn't have the best relationship. He was a cold, distant man who never really understood me. I always felt like a disappointment to him, so when I found out he had left me his old hunting cabin in his will, I was shocked. Some of my friends thought it was his way of playing one last trick on me, forcing me to deal with a property I never wanted. I decided to go up there one last time to clean it out before putting it on the market. It was my way of saying a final goodbye to a man I barely knew. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit by a wall of filth. It smelled like something had crawled inside and died. My father hadn't been to the cabin in over a year before he passed, but the place looked like someone had been living in it recently. There were old food wrappers and empty cans scattered around. As I was scrubbing the floors, I kept hearing a strange rustling sound coming from above my head. The cabin had a small attic, more of a crawlspace, really. You had to pull a cord in the hallway to drop a retractable ladder. Ignoring the knot of dread in my stomach, I pulled the cord and climbed up. The smell up there was 10 times worse. In the dim light of my flashlight, I saw piles of trash, half-eaten snacks, beer cans, and old blankets. I assumed my father had just become a hoarder in his final months. Disgusted, I cleared out some of the trash and decided I'd finish the rest in the morning. I tried to sleep in the bedroom downstairs, but the rustling started again. Scratch, thud, scratch. I tried to convince myself it was just raccoons or squirrels in the walls. But then, I heard the sound of the attic ladder creaking open. I froze. I didn't leave that ladder down. I grabbed my phone and walked into the dark living room, my heart hammering. I turned on a small, dim lamp next to the sofa. The orange glow barely cut through the shadows. As I sat there, trying to talk myself out of a panic attack, I noticed something in the corner of the room, right next to my father's old recliner. It was a heavy, moth-eaten blanket draped over something on the floor. I didn't remember seeing that blanket there when I was cleaning earlier. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and took a step toward it. My flashlight beam hit the bottom of the blanket, and I stopped dead. Protruding from underneath the fabric was the heel of a muddy, worn-out work boot. As I stared, the blanket began to rise and fall in a slow, rhythmic motion. Someone was under there. Someone was breathing. This person hadn't just been living in the attic, they had been watching me clean all day, waiting for the lights to go out. I didn't scream. I didn't stay to find out who it was. I slowly backed into the kitchen, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted out the front door. I jumped into my car and threw it into reverse, my tires screaming on the gravel. As I backed down the long, narrow driveway, my headlights swept across the front porch. A man, gaunt, filthy, with long matted hair and eyes that looked like sunken pits, stepped out of the cabin. He didn't chase me. He just stood there in the moonlight, watching me leave his home. The police arrived an hour later, but the cabin was empty. They told me that since the cabin had been vacant, a squatter had likely moved in. Judging by the sheer amount of trash in the crawlspace, he had been living there for at least a year. That means while my father was alive and visiting that cabin, that man was in the ceiling. And while I was mourning a father I didn't know, a stranger was sleeping just a few feet above my head. I never went back. I hired a crew to gut the place and sold it for whatever I could get. I don't know where that man went, but I hope to God he never finds another attic to call home.